With rapid changes to various color-coded COVID stages, bringing a myriad of obligations on employers. To help us understand what parts are applicable to employers in Peel Region is Jonathan Borelli. Jonathan is a labor lawyer with Mississauga-based firm Kaiser Mason Ball. Welcome, Jonathan.
Hi, David. Thanks for having me.
So, Jonathan, this first of all, we need to establish these rules are only for employers that are in Peel Region, or is it for employers that are in Code Red regions?
So what we'll be talking about today applies to employers in Peel Region. So that's Mississauga, Brampton, and Caledon. But you know what, David, I wouldn't be surprised if we see these restrictions, being placed on more and more employers across Ontario. But for the purposes of today, we'll speak just to employers in Peel.
Now, the fines are quite significant for employers, so it's really important they pay attention to this stuff because the fines are about $5,000 a day. So if you can kind of guide us through what's so special about the rules that apply to employers in Peel, and how do they avoid this $5,000 fine?
Yeah, no, definitely. So on November 14th, excuse me, on November 14th, the medical health officer of Peel, Dr. Lowe, introduced some new guidelines and new orders, in fact, for employers in Peel to abide by. And so a lot of them were just turning up the volume on what we already knew. But of course, as you mentioned, that fine is significant. And like you said, it's failure to comply with these rules that we'll talk about today can attract a fine of $5,000 a day, right? So for some small businesses, that might be quite significant. So what Dr. Lowe said was, first of all, he gave directions on managing employees in Peel Region. And so it was very much confirming, if there is an employee who is diagnosed with COVID or who has symptoms of COVID, right, they must be excluded from the workplace. So they cannot be allowed to enter. And so what that is doing there is really reinforcing the workplace screening that we know is already present for every employer in Ontario. So what that is before an employee enters the workplace, the employer must perform a screening of certain questions that the Ontario government set out. Essentially, it's, do you have symptoms? Were you in close contact with anyone who had symptoms or who was diagnosed, and have you traveled? And so, this for Peel makes it very clear that that screening must be done, and it has to be done properly.
Now, are we talking about the screening has to be done every single day for every single employee that walks through the doors?
Yes, and in fact, how I read it was the screening has to be done before the employee walks through the doors. That's what's key, because once the employee walks into the doors, they're now into the workplace. So it's really before the employee enters the workplace. So what I've seen some employers do is they have a text messaging system where the employee can answer all the questions, whatever the questions may be. They can answer them in a text message or in a link that gets sent to a text message. I've seen some other employers have one of those barcodes that you can scan with your phone outside of the workplace, and it would lead you to an online form, and you can answer those questions. So it's key that it's done before the employee enters the workplace.
Now, what about customers entering the workplace? Do the same rules apply?
Yeah, the same rules apply for any kind of visitor that's entering the the workplace. So again, you might have, like I said, that barcode that you could scan for anyone, not just employees, although Dr. Lowe said that it is mandatory for employees to do that, but for any essential visitor that enters the workplace. But the order that was sent out by the region also said any non-essential visitors shouldn't be coming to the workplace anyway. So really, all those people that are entering the workplace, they have to be essential.
So let's go through some of those questions that are mandatory that you must ask people as they're coming into the workplace.
Right. So the first one has to do with, do you have any symptoms of COVID? And what I'm telling employers is that they should, for the best guidance on what symptoms to look for, they should look to, Ontario's self-assessment for COVID-19. And so that's available online. And you'll be interested to know that it is updated all the time. And so if you did it back in March or April, there will be more questions. There's additional information that's available there. So I encourage everyone to go on to the self-assessment. In fact, do it themselves. And those list of symptoms, and they're quite exhaustive. It's not just 3 or 4 or 5. I'm telling employers to look at every possible symptom that's available on the self-assessment. So that has to do with symptoms. If anyone has traveled outside of Canada in the past 14 days, if that's the case, that employee would not be allowed to enter the workplace. And the last one would be if they've had close contact with any of those 2 groups of people.
Now, there's also a couple of more cases, or if employers have cases of COVID that have been identified in their workplace, there's some more obligations that they need to pay attention to. That's
right. Yeah. So this newest order from the Region of Peel says that the workplace must report any outbreaks, and that's a term that they use in the order. They must report the outbreak to the Region of Peel and to the Ministry of Labor. And the way that the Region of Peel defines an outbreak in a workplace is if there is 2 or more cases of COVID that originated from the workplace. And so the order specifically says, if there is an outbreak, so if there's 2 or more cases in a 14-day period that are originate from the office, they must immediately inform Peel Public Health and the Ministry of Labor. And of course, failure to do that would attract a fine of $5,000 a day.
So what's your best piece of advice for employers? I mean, this is quite onerous on small businesses, or for any business for that matter. Yeah. To need to go through these hoops. We understand that it's for the protection of everyone. We understand that. But what are you telling your clients when they call you up and say, Jonathan, this is way over the top. I don't know if I can do this.
Yeah. So first of all, if there are these mandatory orders from the provincial government, municipal government, or federal government, they have to be complied with. And so I'm telling employers, of course, we're here to let them know about all the happenings, but every employer needs to be up to date with the most recent happenings in their local region and in the province and in across the country. So number 1, being up to date is key. Number 2 is having a clear policy. And I've helped a lot of businesses, small, medium, and large businesses, come up with a COVID policy. And really, any of the questions that come up, if there is a case of COVID that is contracted in the workplace, the policy already has the answers to those questions. And so having a very clear policy can, really help to, smooth things over in the office. So you know where to go, you know what to do, you know who to contact. And, the workplace screening is key. Wearing masks around the office, if those people are in the office, is key. Physical distancing is key. And there are a couple other things from the order that I think were important. So number 1, there was a prohibition on doing any kind of events taking place in the workplace, right? That was something that was mentioned last week, but it's something that of course continues. And so if there's any sort of gatherings, right, they are kind of restricted and kind of discouraged. And the other thing that the public health officer said was, he made a mention that it's important for employers to not put profit ahead of the health of their employees. And he made that very clear, even in comments after the order was passed. And so what I take from that is, it's important for employers also to know about the different unpaid leaves and all the different leaves of absence under the Employment Standards Act, so that they understand what powers the employer has. And specifically, if an employer has a concern that an employee might infect other workers with COVID-19 in the workplace, the employer is permitted to keep that employee out of the office, whether they are can work from the office or not. So it's important for employers to know all the tools they have in their toolbox.
It's going to be a very interesting time, and certainly lots of calls for you. We've been in conversation with Jonathan Borelli. He is a labor lawyer with the firm Kaiser Mason Ball. Jonathan, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me, David.